This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy. We go deep and lightly surface the big ideas. You know that feeling sometimes where you just want to, well, let it all hang out. Figuratively, usually.
Right. Usually, yes.
But what if we actually took that literally?
Yeah.
Today, we're diving deep into something that's often kept behind closed doors.
Right. Social nudity.
Exactly. And it might spark a bit of surprise, actually.
Well, what's fascinating here is we're not just talking about, some flash-in-the-pan trend or something purely for shock value. Our sources today are pretty varied. We've got a personal story from the walrus. We have actual scientific studies, even a look at the fashion industry.
Yeah.
And they all reveal some really unexpected sides to, well, shedding our clothes in the right places.
Totally. Like this really vivid story of someone moving from, I think it was rural Canada to Berlin.
Right.
And just encountering this completely different vibe around public nudity. Then there's research suggesting that being nude with others can actually make you feel better about your body.
It sounds counterintuitive. But...
Yeah. And better about yourself overall. And get this, even getting naked in the garden might connect us to sunlight in ways we just hadn't thought about.
Plus that fashion angle, how the industry sort of plays with our awareness of the naked body is quite clever.
So the mission for this deep dive then is to really peel back the layers, forgive the pun, on how we see nudity. We want to get past the usual ideas and look at the maybe surprising science and social stuff behind going clothes-free where it's appropriate, of course.
Okay, let's do it. Where do we start? Berlin.
Let's start with Berlin. That culture shock. The writer in The Walrus talks about this real jolt moving from small-town Ontario to seeing people just casually nude in parks.
Yeah.
I mean, the image of, grandparents flipping sausages in their birthday suits. It's pretty striking.
It absolutely is. And that story really highlights how different cultures can be about this. The author mentions Freikörperkultur, FKK, in Germany.
Right, FKK.
And what's interesting is its origins. It wasn't just about, showing off. It actually grew out of the natural healing movement back in the late 1800s.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, a kind of reaction against restrictive Victorian clothes, wanting to connect with nature and health.
And then it gets even more interesting, doesn't it, after World War II, especially in East Germany?
FKK became this sort of quiet, personal act of resistance, a way to carve out freedom against a state that felt pretty controlling to many.
But the common thread through all that history was this idea that the nudity itself wasn't inherently sexual.
Exactly. That's key. Now, if you contrast that with Canada, like the walrus piece does, well, naturism took a lot longer to catch on there. Initially, Canada's got all this space, right? So people who wanted to be nude outside didn't really need organized groups in the same way.
Right, you could just find a secluded spot.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But things changed after WWII with more immigration, especially from Germany. And that's when you start seeing private nudist clubs forming in Canada. Yeah. But they often had a different focus, more on family, strengthening marriage, that sort of thing.
So a much more private vibe compared to the German FKK, which was more out in the open.
Definitely. Which brings up that big question, why the difference? Why public in Germany, mostly private in Canada?
And the suggestion in the Walrus piece is that in North America, nudity just got tangled up with sex way more.
Right. That sexualization became a major barrier to it be accepted in the mainstream.
Okay. Which kind of leads us into what I found genuinely surprising, the potential upsides, psychologically and socially.
Yeah, this is where the research comes in.
Because some studies suggest that when people practice social nudity again, in the right settings, it can actually be good for their body image, their self-esteem, and even overall happiness.
It's pretty compelling. Those surveys in the University of London, for instance, they found naturists generally reported higher self-esteem and life satisfaction. And interestingly, those feelings seem to increase the more often people participated, like a positive feedback loop.
Okay, and then we found those 3 specific studies in one of our sources.
Right, the research suggests.
Yeah. The first was a big survey, and it linked being involved in naturism with higher life satisfaction. And it seemed like this connection worked through having a better body image and higher self-esteem. But what was really interesting was the effects seemed stronger for people who didn't do it all the time. And also, just seeing other naked bodies was linked to better body image, but being seen naked yourself wasn't necessarily the key driver there.
That's a fascinating little detail, isn't it?
Yeah.
It could mean that a big part of the initial benefit is just seeing the sheer variety of normal human bodies outside of the media ideals in a non-judgmental space.
Makes sense. Then the second study, the Bear All for Polar Bears one, that was cool because they actually measured people before and after the event.
Perspective, yeah.
And they found real improvements. Body image, self-esteem, life satisfaction all went up afterwards.
And the third study, at a naturist water park, found basically the same thing again, increases across the board.
Plus, they dug into the why a bit more. They found that the improvement in body image seemed to predict the increase in life satisfaction via the boost in self-esteem.
Like a chain reaction? Feel better about your body, feel better about yourself, feel better about life?
Exactly. So, what's going on? Why does this happen?
Well, the thinking is, like we touched on, exposure to diverse, real bodies is probably a huge factor. It normalizes variety.
Instead of just seeing airbrushed perfection all the time.
Precisely. And also just being in an environment where you feel accepted, where the feedback is positive or just neutral, that can be really powerful, especially around something as sensitive as body image.
And it seems like it's not just about how we feel about ourselves, right? It might affect how we see others, too.
Yeah, there's this idea that social nudity could promote things like empathy, equality, acceptance.
Oh, so?
Well, when you literally strip away the clothes, you strip away a lot of the usual social signals, status, wealth, profession, maybe even some group affiliations.
Right, everyone's kind of the same.
Exactly. And the idea is maybe that encourages us to see past superficial stuff and connect on a more basic human level. Some research even hints that seeing others nude might make them seem more, vulnerable or emotionally open, which could build empathy.
That brings us back to normalizing different bodies. The Walrus article mentions this too, how in North America, being nude often feels like a privilege reserved for conventionally hot bodies.
Oh, definitely. That Instagram example is perfect. Celeste Barber parodying Candace Swanpoel. Barber's post gets flagged, Swanpoel's doesn't.
It screams double standard.
It really does. And you see it elsewhere, like the photographer Camille Brandon having trouble sharing nude photos of plus-size women. It highlights this ongoing battle for representation.
So the argument is maybe more exposure to diverse, non-sexualized nakedness could help shift what we see as normal.
That's the hope. And this might even start in childhood.
Oh, yeah. What about kids?
Well, Professor Keon West did research suggesting that kids who grow up with a positive attitude towards nudity tend to have better body image, higher self-esteem, and better mental health as adults.
Interesting.
And another researcher, Paul Okami, reviewed the literature and basically concluded there's no evidence that non-sexualized nudity harms kids, and it might even have some benefits.
That flies in the face of a lot of cultural anxiety, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. But the consistent finding is the lack of evidence for harm from non-sexualized exposure. That's a really crucial point.
And beyond kids, just the general vibe in these places, non-judgmental, that could lower stress for everyone, right? Improve mental well-being.
Plausibly, yes. Plus, there's the community aspect. People in these groups often talk about a strong sense of belonging, of equality.
When everyone's literally stripped down, it creates a unique social bond.
It seems like it. Now, obviously, we have to acknowledge the cultural hurdles. That strong link between nudity and sex in many societies is a huge barrier to acceptance.
Can't ignore that.
No. But, again, the research keeps pointing to that distinction. Non-sexualized exposure doesn't seem to cause problems. It's an important nuance.
Okay, so we've covered the social side, the psychological side. Let's switch gears a bit. Let's talk about getting naked outdoors. World Naked Gardening Day.
Oh, yeah. It's a real thing.
It is. Usually the first Saturday in May, I read. So May 3rd, 2025, if you're planning ahead.
Mark your calendars. And yeah, it might sound a bit, quirky.
A bit of a lark.
Totally. But it actually touches on some interesting ideas. It's meant to be fun, not political, just about connecting with nature, body freedom.
Makes sense. Founded back in 2005, apparently. Just tend your garden without clothes. Simple.
Though timing might vary, right? Depending on where you are.
Right. Gardening naked in Canada in early May might be challenging.
Brisk, perhaps? So New Zealand apparently does it in October. And someone suggested a Naked Canadian Gardening Day maybe in June.
Adapting to the climate. I like that quote from Barbara Pollard. Something about feeling completely connected with nature without clothes.
Yeah, that really captures the feeling they're going for.
Yeah.
But then there's this other layer, the sunlight thing. Specifically, infrared light.
Ah, the idea that gardening nude lets the infrared light work its magic.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
The claim is that without clothes blocking it, both near-infrared, NIR, and far-infrared, FIR, light from the sun hit your skin. And this might boost your mood, maybe even help your cells.
Okay. Is there any science to that?
Well, there's some interesting research suggesting NIR and FIR light can improve mitochondrial function.
The powerhouse of the cell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe boosting energy production ATP and reducing oxidative stress. The exact how is still debated, but the potential is there.
And clothes obviously block some of this.
They do. Far infrared seems to get through fabric better than near infrared, apparently, but still, being naked gives you the full dose.
And then there's that other idea about timing.
Oh, right. Some researchers suggest morning infrared exposure might sort of prime your skin to make vitamin D later when the UV is stronger.
An afternoon exposure might help with repair.
That's the hypothesis. Needs more research, definitely, but it's an intriguing thought.
Which connects to the old shadow rule for vitamin D, right? When your shadow's shorter than you, usually 10 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Uh-huh. And remember, sunscreen blocks the UV, so less vitamin D, but it doesn't block the infrared light.
Good point. What about being indoors? That sunny spot by the window.
Well, window glass lets the near infrared through. That's the warmth you feel.
Yeah.
But it blocks most of the far infrared, so not quite the full spectrum, even indoors.
Okay, fascinating. So, social benefits, psychological boosts, potential nature, and light connections. Let's do one more shift. Fashion.
Right. How does the fashion industry relate to all this?
It seems kind of separate, but the argument is quite insightful, I thought. It connects back to our basic human interest in the naked body.
Yeah, there seems to be this innate fascination. It's probably rooted in evolutionary psychology, how our brains are wired. Specific brain areas light up more when we see naked bodies.
Like the fusiform body area, extrastratiform body area, things like that.
Exactly. So the idea is clothing, by covering us up most of the time, sort of, deprives us of that direct visual input.
Creates a baseline of curiosity.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And the fashion industry is incredibly smart about tapping into that curiosity. Well, think about design. Sheer fabrics, cutouts, really tight fits. They reveal and conceal at the same time. They hint at the body underneath, creating a lure because it's not fully shown.
Right, playing peekaboo.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then obviously advertising. Using nudity or partial nudity to grab attention, make brands memorable, create positive feelings.
The classic sex sells. Though sometimes controversially.
Often controversially. But the underlying principle is that by making clothes the norm, by covering the body, fashion creates this deprivation. And that makes the strategic reveals, the glimpses of skin, much more powerful.
It hooks into all those deeper reasons we wear clothes too, right? Self-expression, status, attraction.
Exactly. It all ties back to how we perceive each other, maybe even evolutionary drives related to mating and status. It's quite complex.
Wow. Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've covered quite a bit of ground in this deep dive.
We really have. We've seen how views on nudity change dramatically across cultures and history. We've looked at some frankly surprising research suggesting real psychological and social benefits to social nudity. We've touched on that potential connection between being naked in nature and sunlight, and then finished with how the fashion world kind of plays with our built-in interest in the human form.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How much our own feelings about nudity are just learned, shaped by our culture, the media we consume.
Definitely. And maybe, just maybe, more exposure to diverse, non-sexualized bodies could slowly start to shift those ingrained perceptions.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on.
Yeah. Maybe consider how your own comfort level with nudity or discomfort might be tied to your upbringing, your society's norms.
Because looking at the natural human body with a more accepting eye, in the right contexts, actually bring unexpected benefits. For you personally, or even for the community.
It's something to think about. Maybe you'll look into naturist groups or body positivity movements, or maybe you just take a moment to reflect on your own biases and assumptions about it all. Food for thought. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other podcasts, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.